Welcome to this episode of Making the Argument, brought to you by Ground News. And we're going to get to them just a little bit later in this episode. It was a little over 5 years ago that we saw everything from the BLM riots to COVID to all of the policies and implementations and vaccines and cancellations and government intervention into social media. All of these things took place in a relatively short period of time. And there's no question that it changed things about the United States. In fact, you could argue that it broke some things about the United States. And what we're going to do today is we're actually going to go through and we're going to talk about some of the things that changed during that period of time and the response that we're now seeing to it. I mean, for instance, I don't think many of us, if you were sitting there in 2020 watching cities burn, I don't think many of us thought that just a mere 5 years later, the Supreme Court would be issuing a whole host of decisions in favor of things like getting rid of national level injunctions at lower federal district courts. We wouldn't have seen, Supreme Court decisions saying that no, parents do have a right to opt their children out of gender theory programs within their public school system. I don't think anybody had on their bingo card alligator Alcatraz in Mexico with respect to deporting illegal immigrants. But here we are. There was this massive influx of policies and procedures and government interventions in 2020. And now we're seeing a backlash and response to it. And the big question is, what have we learned? What have we learned over these 5 years along the categories of family, of economics, of politics, of culture? What have we learned? And where do we see the country going in the future? All of that coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I'm your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And of course, our resident historian, political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How you doing, Christian?
I'm doing well, and a lot has changed over the last 5 years.
A lot has changed, and we are going to get into it. And for this episode, we actually relied on Ground News to help us identify trending articles and stories that are impacting our lives. For instance, if you wanted to dig a little more into alligator Alcatraz, you just type it right into the search bar, and boom, over 300 articles from the left, right, and center, along with links and summaries to each, all at Ground News. Now remember, Ground News is both a website and an app that curates all the latest stories and provides you with insight into who is covering the news and why. So if, like us, you're a little tired with how other sites curate the news and want more transparency, go over to ground.news/MTA and get 40% off their Vantage plan. For just $5 a month, you can check out all of their many features and get unlimited access just like we do at ground.news/MTA. Now, let's go on with the show.
So, where do we begin? I think a lot, has happened in the last 5 years. And by the way, a lot has affected us, too. I think that we're also kind of different people. And on that front, I remember it was 5 years ago. Tina will tell you all about this. It was 5 years ago that you ran for Congress. And I had this big plan. I was like going all the way back to like 2012. I had this plan of like, we're going to get Nick elected to the legislature. And then we're going to run him for our congressional seat. And that's what we're going to do. Nick's going to be in D.C. He's going to be the next Ron Paul. He's going to, fight the good fight. And I'm going to be alongside him. And that's what my career is going to be. And that's what Nick's career is going to be. I made his career decision for him. And so, we go through the process. He announces that he's going to run. We win the primary. That was super fun.
Well, keep in mind, like we announced this. And
in
then
December
all of a sudden,
2019.
And then COVID starts to hit.
So
and
even the primary was hard.
Yep.
Primary was brutal.
So we do that. We win the primary. We get to the general election, and Nick loses by 1.8 points. Just a few thousand
I still
votes.
don't believe he lost.
When a thumb drive showed up in Henrico County with 15,000 votes that they had misplaced.
So
mislabeled.
Mislabeled.
And there was
obviously,
no chain of custody.
and in some ways, I feel like that was actually more devastating for me than it was for Nick. But since that run for Congress 5 years ago, I'm just thinking about just that year, let alone the entire Biden era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so many things that happened. And so I'm curious to kick us off here. Like, what do you think has happened over the last 5 years, and how has that changed your perception of politics?
Everything that I thought about politics when I first got into it, especially with the process of engaging in the legislature and making arguments and all that is pretty much changed for me. Once upon a time, and look, I've said this recently, and I will not say it until I see, and I will not say it again until I think it's true again. But my attitude used to be, we're all Americans. We all basically want the same things. We want our constituents to be happy, healthy, prosperous, and free. We just have very, very different ideas on how to get there. I do not believe that anymore. I will not be saying it anymore until I think it's true again. And a lot of people will hear that and think that it is harsh or overly divisive or hyperbolic. I'm sorry, I don't care anymore, because again, those would all be accusations against me for saying what I believe to be true, and I'm tired of accusations being a substitute for an argument. When I look at what the left wants and what they're trying to achieve, I can't categorize that as happy, healthy, prosperous, and free. Now, maybe they have some other way to describe it. I do believe that they think it's in the best interests of the country. I do not think they believe it's in the best interest of everybody. I think they have a particular set of people that they're very, very concerned about maybe representing, or like, this is the nice version of this, right? It's not no, they're just power hungry socialists. It's like, no. I know too many people on the other side of the aisle who I think genuinely believe in what they're trying to do. And here's the part you need to understand. That makes it more terrifying. Because if this was all just about power hungry transactional politics, okay, they're going to take a little, they're going to give a little, they're going to do the thing, maintain power. That can go, don't get me wrong, that approach can go bad as well. But that one isn't so infused with ideological fervor that they're ready to set cities on fire or throw people in jail for disagreeing with them. There's other people in this environment where they 100% believe you are the enemy based off of your skin color. And even if they don't believe it, that's what they're saying, and their constituents believe it. Because after all, their leaders are saying it. And so I went through this process of finding people on the other side of the aisle, a couple here and there, that I could still maintain a good logical debate with, and we could use reason and we could use evidence, and maybe we would come to different conclusions based off of our perspectives. But we all agreed that reason and evidence were still important things to use when actually coming to conclusions. I have seen the number of people on the other side of the aisle that fill that definition drastically decline and be replaced by people that are fine using logic and reason all the way up to the point where it no longer serves their purpose, and then logic and reason become tools of the patriarchy. They become tools of oppression against the oppressed. And all that matters is the narrative of the oppressed. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, the narrative of the oppressed always justifies whatever their political objectives are. When you find yourself in a situation like that, you're in danger. But here's what changed the last 2 years. It was watching the people on the other side of the aisle that I know use logic, use reason, that what they actually want is again, it may be different than what I want, but I can understand it. It's watching those people vote in favor of all the things that the radicals want, and never once having the courage to stand up and say, guys, I think we might have gone too far. What that tells me is that you have near total ideological capture of the Democratic Party right now. And I don't see it changing anytime soon. And so when you start to recognize that that's the current environment is not, hey, we all want similar things, we got different paths to it. We want diametrically opposed things, and one side is absolutely willing to use force, coercion, power, taxation, subsidies, whatever it takes in order to get what they want. And the idea of, I just want to be left alone, that doesn't work for them. You will not be allowed to be left alone. You can't be, because if you're not an ally, you're part of the problem, right? It's not good enough. You can't be neutral. You have to be an ally, or silence is violence, and you will be punished. You will be made to care. And that's the reality. And I'm tired of pretending like it isn't. And so I don't.
And they still will say they want the same things as you. So when you say we want everyone to be happy, healthy, prosperous, and free, what they do is they skew those definitions a little bit. So happy means we're going to anything and everything to appease these people who are unhappy in their own party. And they're all unhappy. If you look at the numbers, the mental health issues on their side are insanely high. But then when you get to the healthy, then it's like, oh, healthy meaning, oh, sometimes a woman won't be very healthy during a pregnancy. So let's just exterminate the child and get rid of it. And when they say free, it's freedom to destroy your children. And then it's also this whole idea of health. It's like, well, it's healthy to mutilate people's bodies because their mind thinks that they are a different gender than they are. And so their body needs to come in compliance, not their mind. And so they have basically, there are these like cartoons for kids that they call them, they're just brain rot. It's just everything is so outside of reality and anything that could be considered normal. It's like it actually makes your brain cave in on itself because of the way that there is no logic at all. That's what they've done to the language. And I remember thinking this is absolutely crazy. I mean, they used to be the ones who were anti-big pharma, and now they're ready to wish death upon anybody that doesn't mask up in the name of big pharma and get the jab and do all of this. There was a lot of mask off, so to speak, not the COVID mask, but like they let their other mask slip a little bit. And
I think what we saw is a lot of the things that we would have looked at as kind of issues that you associated with the left, whether it be things like civil rights or whether it be things like the environment. What you saw was that in many respects, those were vehicles. So civil rights were a vehicle in order to achieve greater, government power, greater socialist intervention into the economy, into society. And when they ceased to be useful vehicles in their original form, they adapted or they changed. It's the same thing with and environmentalism. That's why the rise of the watermelon's green on the outside, red in the center, because it seemed like every solution to climate change was more government control over property, more government control over the economy. And it's like, this sounds a lot like what the socialists were trying to do with respect to seizing the means of production. Just, you're no longer using an economic justification for it. You're using an environmental justification for it. But here's what's...
And they suppressed information that would show that the stuff they wanted was actually no better for the environment, or even worse in some cases, but they would suppress all of that and cancel you for even highlighting it like you were some kind of kook.
Well, if I could also highlight this, it is because I've really tried to figure out, like, what is it that kind of broke me on this idea that, oh yeah, we can just work this out through the normal processes that we always have. It really is, to some degree, the incorporation of postmodernism and deconstructionism. And I'm not going to go into a big thing about that. Postmodernism is essentially the rebellion against meta-narratives, right? Deconstructionism is the idea that words are used as a tool of influence or oppression, that you're attempt to impose your will, when in reality everybody just imposes their own meaning onto the words as they read them or see them. And the problem with both of these theories is that there's a understandable critique of modernism within postmodernism. There's an understandable critique within deconstructionism. The problem is that both of them are universal solvents, right? They disintegrate everything. They eliminate any sort of mechanism of objective truth or reality. And whenever you do that, you're automatically going to invite conflict, because now if you and I cannot agree on objective truth and an objective processes for understanding truth and then living in peace with one another, or at least agreeing to leave each other alone, then conflict, physical conflict, is inevitable at that point. It's inevitable. Not because of us, because of the philosophy from which you've built your arguments and your worldview. There's this other component here that I think is important to understand. And there's this principle in Islam called taqiyya. And it can be caricatured as just Muslims are allowed to just arbitrarily lie to non-Muslims, right? The way, if we want to steel man it, though, the argument is that it's supposed to be rooted in this idea that Muslims can lie if it's in situations of self-preservation, which, okay, I'm at war and somebody, I'm going to lie. How many people do you have hiding in? How many Jews do you have hiding in your attic? Well, I'm not going to tell the SS commander how many. right? But then it goes into this other thing, also, quote, safeguarding one's faith, family, or community. Well, that's a far broader interpretation, right? What I've come to find is that a lot of the people that I engage with in the left have substituted leftist ideology for religion. It has become a kind of religion. It's a utopian goal that they're trying to achieve. And when you fall outside of it, you're basically engaging in heretical practices. But there's this other concept of I can utilize these tools when I find them useful, and then I can abandon them when I don't find them useful. In a sense, what I can do is it's okay if I lie to you about my true intentions or about what I want, because I am safeguarding the leftist end state and objectives that I want. And because I'm doing all of it on behalf of the oppressed against an oppressor, then there is no objective moral code that I have to abide by, right? You're literally Hitler. And so again, when you create this sort of environment, when you create this sort of intellectual reasoning behind achieving your objectives, then this all becomes solely about the adjudication of power, right? It's an oppressor versus oppressed dynamic. There is no, it is a binary, funny enough, right? It is a binary in their world, and they haven't left many peaceful mechanisms for adjudicating it. And so I think that's what I saw change with respect to the whole critical theory, critical race theory, critical queer theory. All this is in critical. That's what I saw change on the left, where that became the predominant ideological narrative and foundation within the left in the United States. The thing that is now taking place is that because that reached such an intensity level during COVID, I think millions of Americans that thought to themselves, oh, it can't be that bad. Oh, those are the crazies out in San Francisco, or maybe in the sociology department at Berkeley, but it's not my neighbor. It's not Jim. You know, we watched the Vikings game together until Jim was willing to report you to authorities for not wearing a mask.
For having too many people to your birthday party.
What came out then was the understanding that, oh, they would do this to me? Like, yes. Yeah, it's not just Donald Trump they hate. They would do it to you. And they would feel completely morally justified in doing it to you. And that was the part where the veil came off. To what Tina said is like the mask came off. And now it was this, oh, I've got to take this seriously. Yes. Yeah. Those of us who have been telling you, they're showing you who they are. Take them seriously. They mean it, right? We were right. And now they realize we were right. And now it's a question of figuring this out. Now, the other thing that happened during that time period is that we had a lot of other people on the left who realized that the left went crazy. And they came over, and they've been good allies. But some of them also think that they've got this all figured out now. It's like, you were the people that couldn't figure this out for like decades.
Well, they created the monster.
Right. And now you're telling us you should be leading the charge. It's like, welcome. But just like we don't let a new convert to Christianity lead the church the next day, right? You get to also sit back and recognize you had a massive blind spot. And the things that we told you were materializing, the things that we told you were going to be the intellectual underpinnings for what happened now happened. We were right. You were wrong. And so let's sit down and let's make sure that we are all on the same page with respect to how we were able to identify something you weren't. And I think that's important.
For me, the biggest realization was that politics requires moral alignment for you to have discourse or debate, for that matter.
So, some moral alignment, not absolute moral alignment.
No, not absolute, but I mean fundamental moral alignment.
Agreed.
So, I mean, for example, the United States never has had an official state-sanctioned religion, but it's always had a civic religion.
Yeah.
In part because I've said this before, that like all politics is inherently theological, because political debates, political questions, always, if you boil them down to their smallest point, all political debates are always centered around questions of which vision of the sacred is going to prevail.
Yeah.
When a libertarian is talking about, well, I want automatic weapons and no taxes, what they're really saying is that property rights are sacred, and that infringing upon them is immoral. And when a blue-haired woke progressive is going out there and talking about gender fluidity and transing the kids, we recoil in horror, but they are making an absolutist, maximum individual choice and freedom argument, in the sense that anything that's not freely chosen is tyrannical, including, concepts that they use like assigned families, assigned sex. Notice how they use the word assigned there?
Yeah.
Because they're implying that it's not been freely chosen.
Yeah.
And so from their standpoint, they're arguing that absolute individual autonomy, in the sense that the individual must choose everything.
Yeah.
Even things that are assigned by the laws of physics, they still have to choose them. And if they're not, that's tyrannical. We look at that and say that's lunacy. But again, they are making a theological or moral argument, not one that we would recognize as within the framework of Christian theology.
Yeah.
But that is still a moral argument. I'm not saying that we have to agree with it, of course, but that's what political debates are, is that they always boil down to those type of moral questions. And if there's no moral alignment, and I'm talking again about basic fundamentals. I'm not saying that you have to belong to this church or that denomination. I'm talking about basic fundament. There needs to be a telos, right? There has to be a ground that everything else can spring forth from.
There are certain ideologies and beliefs which may be very important to you, which may be important to your family, or maybe a club you join or a church you belong to, which are not as critical to the overall, collaboration among millions of people within a society. There are other moral precepts which are absolutely critical, right? Thou shalt not murder is critical to a society, because if you're not willing to actually condemn and then use physical force to prevent and punish murder, you cannot build a high trust society. And successful societies are high trust societies. High trust societies are ones that agree upon certain fundamental moral frameworks in order to govern their actions. And all those and here's the important part. Not all of those moral frameworks are legal, but some of them are. Some of them have to be.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're at. So I think I think the biggest change that we saw 5 years ago was the mask came off, and we saw just how extreme things could get in a relatively short period of time. That scared enough people into actually getting more active, more involved, and recognizing what the true nature of this debate was. And now what you saw is that rebellion in the last few years, that absolute unadulterated rebellion against offenses and argument. You can't say that it offends me. Well, now I'm going to say it louder, right? It used to be if you try to use offense as a substitute for an argument, the response would be, hey, offense is not a substitute for an argument. I don't mean to offend you, but we need to be able to have civil dialogue. Now the offense is, what offended you? How can I say it harder? Right? It's that's a distinction that has taken place. The right used to be predominantly about when you elevate a concern that offends me, I think that's racist, I think that's sexist. The right's response was, how do we analyze what has taken place in order to determine whether or not you have a legitimate claim, and then we can decide what we should do about that. That has been so overused at this point, to where the point you say you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a bigot, that is an automatic indicator that I am talking to somebody that probably doesn't have a great deal of interest in objectively defining racism, sexism, or bigotry. They're simply using it as a tool of manipulation to try to shut down debate. So now I automatically disregard those claims. Which you got to ask the left, is that what you wanted? Did you want people operating in an environment where now they automatically dismiss what used to be a very serious accusation? Well, I got news for you. They're not disregarding it because it's not because racism, when it appears, is not a serious problem. They're disregarding it because you used it as a tool of political manipulation. Well, now you've taken out the sting of it.
And they've opened a Pandora's box that I don't think that they're prepared for. Speaking of Pandora's boxes, though, this actually kind of leads us right into the second point here, which is that, one thing that I personally noticed on a kind of like societal level or a family-based level is that there has been a ongoing crisis within the American family for decades. But 2020 really accelerated that trend, in part because of political polarization. You saw families start to fracture based on ideological lines rather than them remaining a cohesive, nuclear family unit. The other element of this is the collapsing birth rate. Mm-hmm. And tying into that, before I do, here's the birth rate chart that goes all the way back to 1950. And you see that, we've just been plummeting since the 60s. Oh, I wonder what happened back then. Yeah. Right? And then it stabilized and recovered and then went back over 2% until about 2008. Look at that. And then COVID came along and it was like an all-time low. Yeah. And what's interesting is that it's rebounded since COVID, but not nearly to where it
Well,
was.
go to the rebound years that you're seeing,
We're
right?
at 1.79.
So yeah, it's
which is still below replacement.
Still below replacement, but
it's still below where.
Okay, wait, stop.
But look at 2020. What were we at 2020?
Go to 2020. Okay, now go to 2020. What 3? Okay, so 1.62 was I think the lowest it got, right?
Yeah.
And now you've seen a jump, and it's a significant jump, right? It's not where it needs to be, but it's a significant jump.
It's still below where it was in 2016, though.
Yeah, no question. I think the other thing that you saw is the thing what's happening with the family goes way back farther than 2020. And it started, again, there's a reason why the drop-off takes place in the 60s is because that's when, and look, I think Andrea did a wonderful job of explaining on the podcast that we did where we talked about this idea, was feminism ever a good idea, right? Is it just third and fourth wave feminism that was the problem, or were there problems with even the first wave? And her contention is that no, there were. It was baked into the system the entire way. I think she made a very, very good argument for why that's true. But the 60s is when it reached popularization levels within academia. It's also, and you need to understand, the sexual revolution was not just a feminist phenomenon. It also was a phenomenon with LGBTQ issues. You see this with Kinsey. You see this with John Money, where all of a sudden we weren't just talking about promiscuity and monogamy. All of a sudden it was this whole idea of sexual expression and identity was really starting to come under, going through a massive revolution. And the end result was, in many respects, is that it dissuaded people from wanting to have families. It significantly impacted birth control, abortion in 1973.
I was going to say birth control was approved by the FDA in 1960, but it didn't. It had to go through some Supreme Court stuff. So by 1965 is when it was the most widely available. And some states made it available in 1960, but then several states basically had to go through a Supreme Court decision. So birth control right there, that is what, for the most part, caused that, which I also think birth control is the reason why so many men are low testosterone, is because when women are on birth control, they're attracted to men with more effeminate features that are less masculine, and they basically breed with men who have lower testosterone, which also plays into the divorce rate, because when she chose you, she saw you as what she wanted. Then when she got off the birth control, she realized you were a weakling and she didn't want you, so she divorced you.
So that's a lot to unpack, and I'm not even going to try to do it in this episode. But
that's
your
another
point,
episode, Tina, for another day.
To your point, and Nick's point as well, a lot of these trends have been going on before 2020, but you also brought up something really interesting, which is that a lot of these things fed into each other. So like the feminist movement, in many respects, propelled the LGBTQ movement, which eventually propelled transgenderism.
Yeah.
And out of all of this, there is one thing that is much more recent that you can absolutely point to and be like, no, this did not exist before 2020. And it's this. It's the fact that young men and women are now viewing each other as enemies, not as partners. The data here, the gulf between, particularly Zoomers, between Zoomer men and Zoomer women, young men and women, is just unprecedented in history. So if you scroll down here, this is what's so shocking.
Yeah.
The gender gap on Trump's job approval, and this is a very recent poll. This is from like a month or two ago. And it's showing that young women, 18 to 29, 24% approval rating. Deeply unpopular. Don't ask my sister what she thinks about Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And then young men, well, I mean, it's 45%, which is, I mean, that's basically about average right now. It's a little bit below the national average, but young men are far more supportive of Donald Trump, and young women think he's literally Hitler.
Yeah.
And again, this is unprecedented, because if you go back to when I was like 18 in the second Obama term, young men and women basically had the same approval rating on Obama. They all loved him, right?
Yeah.
You know, all the millennials back when I was young, you know, they all supported him. But now we're, 15 years into this, there is a gap that's emerging that was not around before. And I have a feeling that this gap has something to do with this, and it has something to do with the rise of feminism. And so you can go back to the 60s, but again, it's accelerated, I think, since 2020.
I think you're right. I think that the difference is that for starting in the 60s, really starting in the 50s, but really accelerating the 60s and beyond, is the state was offered as the alternative to the husband and father. And
so are we now just at the consequence stage of this process?
I think we've been in the consequence stage for a while. The difference is that the way it was marketed before. The way it was marketed before was this idea that we're helping single mothers. We're helping women that found themselves in difficult situations. We're helping a woman leave an environment where she wasn't treated well or she was abused or whatever else there was, right? And so that marketing was that was not the sort of marketing that would push away men, right? Most men who want to be good men would look at that and be like, well, of course we want to help a woman not be in a bad situation. The marketing, though, for the last decade has been all men are bad, right? It's the patriarchy. It's unconscious bias. It's all these other things that are impacting the way, and it's all sourced back to men. And so this wasn't just a case of the state is a backup alternative to a husband or father when it doesn't work out. It is the state is your protector against men who would like to rule and dominate over you. That's their true, and that's what they really, I don't care what they tell you, that's what they really want. And the state is going to be the one that stands in the way to tell them they can't do that. And so, well, yeah, that's a completely different mindset, right? The state is no longer protecting women from the bad ones. They're all the bad ones. Well, at the same time that they were telling women this message, men were also getting the message. The difference was that at some point you had enough men go reach critical mass and say, no, this is screw you. Like, well, the future is female. Good luck. Right? Why won't you open the door for me? What Tina's favorite thing, equal rights, equal lefts, right? Sounds horrible, but you raised a generation of men where you told them they were, there's this one famous little TikTok thing where this woman is asking a young man to give up his seat, and he looks at her and he goes, are you pregnant or disabled? No. Then stand. This is what you wanted. Right. And the thing is that 5 years ago, this is where the last 5 years comes into play. 5 years ago, men would have been flooding that screen going, you're a douche, dude. Get up and give your seat to a lady. Now it's like, I guess this is what you wanted.
Chivalry is dead.
I guess, well, no. Okay. This is important. Because there's still a lot of men out there that it's not that chivalry is dead. It's that chivalry will now be given to the people who want chivalry, right? Tim Pool talked about this with freedom of speech, right? He goes, I used to say, I will protect anybody's right to freedom of speech. He goes, now I believe if you believe in freedom of speech, I will protect your right of freedom of speech, which is to say, if you share that basic moral foundation of freedom of speech is important, then I will defend all day long your right to say things I disagree with. The moment you say I don't agree with freedom of speech, fine, I will respect your decision and not apply it toward you. It's the same thing with chivalry. It's not that chivalry's dead. Men have simply said the women who do not want chivalry will not be afforded any chivalry because it is the only way that those women will realize, oh crap, we really liked chivalry. And so there's a degree of this. There's an application of this principle, a limited, that's the important part, a limited application of this principle, which actually makes sense. Because sometimes people don't correct until they realize that what they thought they wanted is not what they actually wanted.
On this topic, the follow-up question that I've got is, do you think that from your perspective, because you and Tina are married and you've been married for 25 years, I guess 26 years actually, have you guys noticed any sort of change within, the broader societal elements that we would call the family or relationships? Because you guys have been married for a generation. You have a daughter that got married in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And you have two other kids that they're not getting married yet, but they're getting close to moving out. And so from my perspective as a single guy, I've looked around and I'm like, we're finally in the consequences stage of a decades-long process that has led to just relentless attacks on masculinity, the destruction of the family unit, the annihilation of traditional relationships between men and women, getting to the point that men and women, younger men and women, just view each other as enemies. And so me as kind of a spectator, I'm looking around at the last 5 years and I'm like, a lot of this was coming.
Yeah, no, it is. And the thing is I've tried to be careful about not being I had someone the other day kind of, quite frankly, pissed me off because I made a comment about marriage, and they came back and said any man telling a man to get married under these legal conditions is setting them up for the slaughter. And I kind of rolled my eyes at that, and I came back and I said, okay, let me explain something. My wife and I got married, both came from broken homes, multiple divorces, went into two of the hardest professions to maintain a marriage: special forces during wartime and politics, right? And yet here we are, happy, healthy, in love. It's not about it's about choices and discipline. Now, here's what I'm happy to admit. The number of people that share those ideas has diminished. But when somebody tells me, Nick, get out of your trad bubble for a second, like I'm gonna slow you down right there. Nothing about, or I shouldn't say nothing. Much about what we grew up with was not traditional. All right, multiple divorces in both of our homes. That's not traditional. Right, growing up in an environment where I get to see my dad 3 months out of the year, that's not traditional. Going into a profession where the first 5 years of the first 10 years we were married, I was gone due to training, deployment, or schools, that's not traditional. And yet, somehow it worked. And what I'm here to tell you is the somehow isn't luck. So I'm not going to pretend. Now, the immediate response to that is, it was different when you got married. That part is true. The number of people that actually believe what Tina and I believed when we got married in 1999 was higher. But that doesn't mean we were living at the height of TradCon.
But us getting married at that age was really bucking the norm. I mean, we were 19 and 20, and most people were waiting much longer than that to get married. So what we did was way outside of the norm anyway. Most of the people we know from back then are not married to their previous spouse.
Yeah.
You know, so we still saw a massive number of divorces. We had people sitting there betting on how long our marriage would last. I mean, so it wasn't normal then. We did something abnormal, but it wasn't. Granted, it wasn't as bad as it is now.
But here's what I would say that happened over the last 5 years that is not, because a lot of the things 2020 I don't think impacted the problem with marriage as I think there was a lot more going on with that particular issue. But it was all exacerbated in 2020 because that was the other thing you saw, is that white, college educated, liberal women were dominating a lot of the narrative. You saw the Me Too movement right around that time as well. And there was elements within the Me Too movement that were addressing very, very serious problems that needed to be addressed. Now, I will note for a moment that a lot of the major issues that they were addressing were taking place in liberal enclaves. I'm sorry, Hollywood was a bastion of conservatism and the patriarchy? No. And yet, that's where a lot of this, you know, with Weinstein and everything else. Now, that was by no means the only area that it was taking place. But then you also started to see this culture that was pushed on that also turned, I mean, I will say this, that sexually assaulting a woman, physically sexually assaulting a woman, it is one of the most, in my mind, again, one of the most horrific things that you can do, because you're taking a power dynamic and then you're overwhelming someone in order to achieve sexual gratification at their expense. Right? You have done something that in my mind means that you should be curb stomped. Right? I don't want you to just go to jail for 5 years and think about what you've done. If you've actually engaged in that form of sexual assault, and we're avoiding using the word because YouTube immediately, you know, downgrades it if you do. But if you've done that, I'm open to the death penalty under the right circumstances. Right? The problem is that what we saw was that all of a sudden regret was now a mechanism for, well, if I feel bad about it later, then that must have meant I didn't want to do it at the time. And what you started to see was men got the message where it's like, okay, I'm not allowed to make an advance because if you like it, it's okay. But if you like it at the time and then you decide later you don't like it, now it's not okay. And so all of a sudden it was this arbitrary environment. It was this arbitrary world where nobody knew what the boundaries were. Now, can I just say to the men out there before everyone starts cheering and going, yeah, see, that's exactly the problem. You know how to avoid that? Don't have sex with a woman you're not married to. It's amazing. It's amazing how the number of instances or accusations like that dwindles to almost nothing when you don't have sex with random women. Don't have sex with a woman that would be willing to kill your kid if she got pregnant. And women, don't have sex with a man that's not willing to commit to you before having sex. These are basic moral premises. But again, those have been thrown out a long time ago, and so it set these conditions where now all of a sudden, left-wing culture had pushed for hookup culture. They advanced its sex work as work, like all of this other stuff, and they created this environment where they completely, there was nothing sacred about sex anymore. It was just a physical interaction between two people, and as long as it was consenting, it was fine. And then what did you see over time? Well, they started to question, well, what is the true age of consent? And I remember those of us who 5 years ago were saying, watch, they're going to start to add pedophilia to this. Watch, they're going to start pushing for lowering the age. Watch. And we got told what we always get told, you're crazy, that's never going to happen. Well, now it started to happen. So what's the backlash? Well, the backlash now, which this is the least encouraging, the backlash now has been this idea of the positive side is this absolute disgust. I always like it when I hear this thing, you're just transphobic. Phobia means an irrational fear or hatred. I promise you I'm not afraid. And I promise you what I feel is not irrational. I'm seeing something that I think is highly destructive, both for the people that engage in it and for the people that perpetuate it, and especially toward the people who perpetuate it toward children. So that sort of disgust which is taking place is getting called phobia. It's not phobia. It's not phobia. But then when it comes to like marriage and family and relationships, I think a couple of things are happening. One, the fact that men are the ones returning to the church, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but the fact that men are returning to the church, the fact that men are going back and kind of re-embracing this notion of honor, that's what's going to get more women to change as well. And women don't want to hear, a lot of feminist women especially don't want to hear that. Feminist women don't want to hear that if men start to take more of a leadership role in society, they will actually go back and embrace traditional femininity, but it's absolutely true. And it's true because when you talk to liberal women complaining about how come the only men I'm attracted to are conservative ones, it's because they're embracing traditional masculinity, and that's what you want. That traditional masculinity speaks to your traditional femininity. And when you actually embrace it instead of fighting it, what you find is that men and women are supposed to cooperate, not compete. And so I think the cracks in that armor are starting to take place, but what we need to realize is that more than anything else, that has been a decades-long process to get us to this phase. And what the only way out of that phase is for more men to stand up and insist on taking their proper role in society. And I believe I believe women will follow. But that's what it's going to take. If you're waiting for women to just suddenly appreciate it overnight and then men can start to lead again, that's never how this was going to work. Never how it's going to work.
Not only that, we're basically the women who just can't be won over to it are just going to get left behind. They'll end up aborting all of their offspring and dying old alone with all their cats.
Well, can I point out something? I have two daughters. Right? Both of them were raised. If you talk to any one of my daughters, here's what you're going to find. They're very strong in their opinions. They're very strong in what they believe about truth and reality. They're willing to debate you. They're willing to talk. They're passionate. They're not pushovers in the least. And they want men who are going to be the spiritual heads of their household. They want a man that will protect and provide. And they want to support a man that will do that. They want to be a part of that process. They want to find a man that will do those things so that they can be his wife, not his competitor, not his, corporate partner. They want to be his wife. And here's what my oldest daughter got married at 21. I will be shocked if my youngest daughter is not married within a similar time frame. Both of them, two men that are traditional men that want to take on roles of the spiritual head of their household. They believe in protecting and providing.
And not wealthy. They're not wealthy people. And that's just it.
So anyways, that's my component with the family side of this. By the way, where you're not going to hear about all of these issues that are taking place within society and what are the true root causes of it? Probably at the government-run public school, right? I wonder why that is. I wonder why it is that a government-run school would have a natural incentive in order to perpetuate a particular narrative about society. I wonder why it is that these same institutions of higher education, which are actually providing the teaching credentials and which are overwhelmingly left-wing, are going to tell you that, no, what we need is more critical theory, more feminism, more of these things within your kids' elementary, middle school, and high school classes. But if you are a little bit frustrated with what's going on in that environment, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, I need to seek out an alternative. Maybe it's private school. Maybe it's a co-op. Maybe it's homeschooling. Well, Tina and I just did a 12-part series, which is absolutely free to take, where we actually run you through our entire journey of educating kids from kindergarten all the way through high school graduation and on to their next phase of life. If that's something that you're even a little bit curious about, what did we do? Why did we do it? Because I will tell you this much, it was not part of our original plan. We did not get married thinking, gosh, one day I hope we can homeschool. We thought those people were weird and we didn't want to be like them. We wanted to do what the normal people did. And then we saw what was going on in our schools and realized there was nothing normal about any of that. And so we took the decision to homeschool. We take you through the ups, the downs, what we thought we did well, what we wish we would have done better. And we explain to you the number one reason why, if we had to do it all over again, we would. And guess what? It's not because of what's going on in our public schools. It's something else entirely. So if you want to check that out, go and look at the link in the description. Link in the description right now that will allow you to go over there, sign up for that, take that course. Once you take it, please, please, please give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. Because if you want us to do a little bit more, maybe on the curriculum side, maybe on the networking side, maybe getting people in touch with the resources that are out there, we've had a lot of interest in this so far. And the moment we know it's what our audience wants, we're going to start to actually dedicate a lot more time and resources to achieving that. So go check that out. Link is in the description. All right, third component.
So you already hinted at this earlier, and this is a great segue to it. One of the things that I think might be potentially a consequence of the increasing war between young men and young women is the fact that there's been an explosion in interest in traditional forms of religion, particularly among young people, particularly among young men.
Yeah.
And it's not, Bubba Gump's Bible study, at a Baptist church somewhere. It's more ancient hierarchical
Catholicism, Orthodoxy.
Yeah, Orthodoxy, Catholicism are the ones that are...
And to the extent it happens in Protestantism, it takes place in the Protestant denominations, which are kind of like the most traditional in their doctrinal interpretations.
It's interesting, and I think that this is very, very needed because just as the feminist poison has permeated through society, it also made its way into the church and has been doing its own sort of deconstruction of faith from as it's hard to explain, but as Christian women, feminists, trying to basically rip apart the patriarchy from the church. And so the fact that men are coming back to save it is a really good thing because I don't think that's run its course yet.
Yeah.
So I want to go through this article a little bit briefly because there's some really just stunning trends in here that I don't think anybody was expecting in 2019.
Yeah.
First point here is that Christianity is actually starting to make a bit of a slight comeback for decades.
In the U.S. and other Western countries, which is important to mention.
For decades, the number of people who identified as Christians had been on the decline year after year after year, and the number of atheists and agnostics had been rising. Well, that has plateaued at this point. And in some cases, the number of agnostics has actually started to drop, and the number of Christians has either flatlined, finally, or in some cases actually started to rise. And what's interesting, again, is where they've started to rise. The United States has no significant tradition of orthodoxy, right? That's an Eastern European tradition, and you're seeing this pop up in the U.S. now. And obviously, we do have a bit of a Catholic tradition, although the United States has largely been a Protestant country for most of its history, but it's also the Catholic Church that's growing as well. So it's the two major hierarchical, more ancient traditional structures within Christianity that, one of them kind of has a history in the U.S. and the other one has almost no history in the U.S. And they're the ones that are seeing a large number of converts. But what's also interesting is what's happening with the Zoomers compared to other prior generations. So, for example, I just want to go through some of this here, is that we've seen a plateau of non-religion in America. But what's also more interesting is the generational divide here.
Yeah.
So, again, each generation's been less Christian than the one before until you get to the Zoomers. Once you get to the Zoomers, you end up finding something really interesting. Gen Z is more likely to attend weekly services than boomers or millennials. Yeah. That is astonishing. Gen Z men show up more than their older brothers who are millennials.
Yeah.
and again, and even compared to some Gen Xers, like that's a total reversal. Now, I'm not saying that we're getting back to the early 1900s where everybody's going to church on Sundays. We're a long ways away from that.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact that you're seeing the youngest crowd in America, that is, by the way, I said boomers. I meant to say Gen X, not boomers. I'm pretty sure that boomers still have the highest religious attendance. But again, for the last 4 generations, you've seen this decline, and Zoomers have started to reverse that. And it's Zoomer men have started to reverse it. So you're seeing a plateauing of the decline of religion. You're seeing a plateauing of the rise of atheists and agnostics. You're seeing a return to traditional hierarchical forms of Christianity in the US and in the West. And you're seeing a rise in religious attendance among Zoomers, particularly Zoomer men. So there's like 4 major data points that are all coming together that I would argue there were not many signs that any of those things were taking place just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So what do you think's going on here?
So this is interesting. When you look at this, within older generations, there's a consistent gender gap among Christians, with women more likely to be religious than men. Part of that, I think, stems from the fact that, as Tina mentioned before, feminism worked its way into the church as well. And you started to see kind of this girl boss version of femininity. Instead of the Proverbs 31 version of femininity, you saw the girl boss version. And that was problematic because it kind of excluded men, right? Men would get lectured at church, women would get uplifted. When in reality, we're all supposed to be, again, held accountable, and it's a process of sanctification, right? So I think that was part of it. The other thing that you saw is within all these Protestant denominations, almost every single Protestant denomination has had a heretical breakoff. And that's confusing to anybody that's on the outside looking in going, well, okay, wait a second. How is it that I can walk into, one Methodist church and they actually teach, from the Bible, and I can walk into another one and they're telling the Sparkle Creed, whatever the heck that is, right? This is confusing to me. So what's not confusing? Catholicism. There's an amazing amount of consistency within Catholicism, regardless of where you go. Now, that's not to say that there's no differences. Talk to a Jesuit, versus a Benedictine, and you're going to get very, very different views on the role of government and society and everything else. So let's not pretend that the Catholics, are simply because they actually embrace the hierarchical structure that they're that it's just one version or interpretation.
And you get the same thing within Orthodoxy, which is not nearly as hierarchical as Catholicism in the sense that there's one leader. I mean, there is an ecumenical patriarch, but he's more of kind of a first among equals.
Yeah.
But the difference is that Orthodoxy is very traditional. The liturgy has not changed in over 1,000 years. It's been very consistent there. And there's also a bit of an emphasis. I have a friend that's Orthodox, and he converted about, I think, 6 or 7 years ago to it. He's from the South, so he grew up in a Baptist environment, but he converted to Orthodoxy. And he pointed out that there's also an emphasis on more, your inner state and your inner character. There's a focus on what they call, a lot of these things are Greek terms, obviously. There's a focus on something that they call theosis. Mm-hmm. This emphasis on union with God, silence, contemplation, and you kind of miss a lot of that stuff in Protestant. You have the pastor with the skinny jeans and the guitar and worship service and music and stuff like that.
It can be a little all over the place.
Yeah, and within Catholicism and Orthodoxy, like I was in Italy at the start of June. Mm-hmm. And I missed 2 podcasts. And while I was there, I was in Milan, and I got to go into the largest church in Italy. Fun fact, it's the largest church in Italy because St. Peter's is technically in Vatican City. Yeah. But the Duomo in Milan, it's this gorgeous, like 900-year-old cathedral. I mean, if this was in the U.S., it would be, I mean, it is a landmark in Italy, but it's stunning. And you go in there, and I actually went in there when they were doing a service. And it's so different than Protestant services here in the West, particularly here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And when I was there, I understand that it's not for everybody, but when I was there, I was like, I can see how somebody can walk in there and feel like that the presence of God is in that room, in that moment during that service when they're doing all of the liturgy and all the rituals and the smoke and everything. And again, a lot of Protestants don't want that stuff, right? We had huge issues on that 500 years ago. But I think for a lot of young men in the U.S. that have grown up in a largely Protestant culture that's more flashy in a busy music style instead of solemn rituals.
A lot of Protestant churches took on the form of either a classroom or a concert.
Yeah.
And sometimes both. Whereas is Catholicism and Orthodoxy, with the iconology, with the tradition, with the rituals, with everything that they do, is very structured. And I think young men who feel like they've been walking around on quicksand for the last 10 years, especially the last 5, looking for something that seems solid and has stood the test of time is very important. Now, again, I as a Protestant, I have I have questions about some of the things within Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I don't see them as enemies, right? I do see them as brothers and sisters in Christ. But there's some serious questions there, right? There's some serious questions over interpretation and things of that nature. Now, I will say this. I think one of the biggest problems that Protestantism had is that it worked itself into this idea where it wanted to be, quote, seeker friendly. And it wanted to engage with the culture. And look, there's something to be said about talking in ways that are culturally relevant. That makes sense from an evangelical perspective. And I'm not talking about evangelical in the term of, a particular like sect or idea or branch.
Yeah.
I'm talking about just the process of evangelizing. By the same token, the church is supposed to stand for truth. It's not supposed to water down the truth in order to be more culturally relevant. In fact, the best way to become culturally irrelevant is to demonstrate to the broader culture that you don't actually believe in the stuff that you're saying, or that it's all infinitely malleable in order to just get along with whatever you want or whatever makes you feel good. And so, again, if you're someone that is looking for truth and you're someone that is looking for something that is consistent and has stood the test of time, you are looking at a lot of Protestant denominations going right now and going, well, it's not you guys. You guys surrendered on anything over. There's Christians in other countries dying for their faith right now, and you couldn't even stand up to your local state senator, right? You're weak, and I don't want to be associated with weakness. I don't want to be associated with the people that I perceive as having gotten us into this direction. And look, I've even said this before. Now, I will point out that the 3 people that I always mention, one guy in the 18 Fox course, my neighbor Anthony Brown, my team leader Ryan Nienaber, 3 of the guys that I point to as being the ones that really reintroduced me to taking my faith seriously and having it be like an active component in my life. The reason why those guys had influence with me, because all of them were like men. They were traditional masculine men. Those were people that I could count on in a fight, right? And that impressed me because I didn't want skinny jeans, pastor. That wasn't someone I wanted to aspire to be. Now, what all 3 of those guys did was a couple of things. One, again, they operated as they embraced and incorporated biblical masculinity. They didn't point to themselves as the standard. They pointed to Christ. And they were completely unapologetic about what they believed. That didn't mean they were in your face all the time. It just meant that whenever the rubber met the road, they did the right thing. And so they provided a representation of biblical masculinity that someone like me was looking for. Now, all of them were Protestants, right? So it's not this idea that it has to be this or that. But if we're looking for some base level explanations for why I think there has been this trend of men getting back into their faith, but only wanting to attend churches that are going to take their faith serious. They want something to fight for. They want something to build their life around that is not the quicksand that they've been offered by culture.
It's also one of the reasons why I think Orthodox is seeing a massive boom. So, I mean, I can't remember what I was watching, a podcast or something, and they were talking about this massive boom of membership, male membership in the Orthodox.
I have a lot of friends that have joined the Orthodox Church.
I think here's what I would say.
Which again, there's no history of that in the U.S.
No. And when I do, I think it's the tradition, the iconography, and I think it's the idea that it provides something that there's a sense of awe associated with walking into a Catholic cathedral that you're not going to get walking into a warehouse,
a former Pizza Hut
that's been converted into a church, right? Now, here's what I will say before anybody gets too off on that tangent. I love the beautiful architecture associated with not just Catholicism and Orthodoxy, but a lot of the more earlier Protestant cathedrals as well. I think it's wonderful. I think it's beautiful. I am reminded though, and this is, Christ didn't need any of that to be relevant, and so I think I don't think there's anything wrong with the beautiful cathedral, provided that we recognize that the cathedral is not what we're worshiping. The process is that it's Christ. those are the churches that I think are going to continue to attract young men, because if it's anything else attracting them, then what you get is you get a perversion.
And it's hollow.
Yes, you get a hollow, perverted version of what they're looking for. And so my goal, my hope is that they're seeking truth, not an aesthetic.
I think both are important, but I agree that the truth has to be the foundation. It has to be the foundation.
Yeah.
If you try to make aesthetics the foundation, that lacks any sort of transcendence, that lacks any sort of permanent state.
Yeah.
That eventually that will disintegrate and you will be disappointed. You will
Yeah.
find yourself adrift again.
Yeah.
I think it's
I
smart
do-
to draw a line between the aesthetic of it and the actual truth of it. It's the same thing with the whole trad wife trend we talked about the other week. It's
exactly the same
It's the
thing.
fundamentals. It's are you embracing the truth? Because if you're just embracing the aesthetic, that's going to fail you too at some point.
On that front, I do think the aesthetics are important when they're aligned with truth. In part because when I see like these beautiful cathedrals, I know I'm like 900 years ago. I mean, the Duomo in Milan was built over a period of like, I think like 600 to 800 years.
Yeah.
Right. And I was, I'm thinking to myself, like when the first stones were laid there, the men who were building that knew that it wouldn't be finished, but they also knew that they were constructing something to glorify God.
Yeah.
And so when I look at these like beautiful works of art, these beautiful cathedrals in Europe that for decades were empty and are now slowly starting to fill back up again.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, like, I want us to go back to building those type of things, not for us to worship the thing, but for us to glorify God and for us to direct our attention to Him. And so when we build these beautiful works of art, when we create these immaculate stained glass windows, when we create icons, it's not to worship the icon. The Orthodox bring that up all the time. It's also not to worship the architecture, to worship the art. It's to pour your heart and soul into making these things that are beautiful, to demonstrate your commitment to God and say, we are making these things to glorify you. We as insignificant humans are trying to make something to demonstrate how much we love you.
Yeah.
And when you do that, when you align yourself in truth towards that, I think that's when you get European civilization. I think that I think that the beautiful art and architecture that you see in the Middle Ages was a sign of the greatness of Western civilization that was to come. And I want us to get back to doing that. That's not to say that it's morally repugnant for a couple of guys to get together at the closed down, Pizza Hut. I mean, Christ talks about how whenever two are there, whenever two meet, I am there. And that's true. That's absolutely true.
Whenever two or more are gathered in my name, I am,
You can meet anywhere and engage in worship, but there is something that's lost when you don't, I think, direct your resources when they're available to constructing things that are beautiful, I think, to glorify.
Well, and I think it's amazing how, again, the object of the enemy is to always get you off by like 1 or 2 degrees, not necessarily 180, because you find over years how far you've strayed. And one of the issues that you see this too on the Protestant side, especially, is this idea there was this push into this idea that, well, we're not going to put our money into beautiful buildings. We're going to put our money into helping people. And then which is, again, on theory, fine. The problem is that when helping people, right, which means helping them with their physical needs, wants, and desires, ends up becoming paramount, you get this idea of social gospel, right? It's no longer lordship to Christ. It's my job is to do nice things for other people. And it's like, well, wait a second. Actually read your Bible and look at what the Bible has to say about charity, because you're going to find there's rules associated with it. And those rules have purpose, because ultimately this is not about making people more comfortable in their poverty or sin or bad choices, because then all you become is an enabler, and the church should never be an enabler for sin or destruction.
Yeah, the whole idea that it was supposed to be for orphans and widows, and not just any widow, widows in good standing.
Yeah.
It was not for everybody. Charity was not for everyone.
Yeah. Well, okay.
On this front, the last thing that I want to ask, which will, I think, go into the next segment, is what do you think are going to be like kind of the long-term consequences of this? Like when I was building the notes for this podcast, it immediately hit me. I'm like, oh, if this continues, there's going to be economic, political consequences, social consequences. Well,
I think so the positive, I always go for what are the positive and negative manifestations for it. If it's again, Jenny and whatnot, the positives are not just political, or it's revival. And the revival component is a beautiful, prospect here, because it actually gets people reorienting toward the things that are truly important and fundamental. And let's face it, we've got this really, really shaky infrastructure sitting on a foundationless, aspect right now, where it's this idea that we're all looking at this building, but when we look at the foundation, we realize, wow, there's a lot of rot and corrosion here. So the idea that if you want to rebuild, if you want to refurbish, if you want to do all these things, it really starts with the foundation. And so if you have more men embracing this and taking on their leadership and their role, this is, out of everything else we've discussed and we'll discuss, this is the one that is most important going forward, because this will set the tone for everything else, provided it's done correctly. The negative manifestation is people use it as an aesthetic. And then once again, religion gets perverted in order to push for things that are inappropriate or wrong. But I actually am hopeful that I think we're going more toward the proper role here, and that is the genuine desire for truth, for morality, and for communion with God. And that's the sort of stuff you can build a strong society on, I think, within Christianity. All right, part 4.
The next part is me as a data nerd is going to geek out about this. We were talking about a positive thing. Now we get to talk about a negative thing, which is doom.
Yeah.
We are economically doomed. In fact, actually, let me just show you this, because you might.
Can we right off the bat, so nobody starts being depressed right now. There are certain institutions, practices, and certainly people that are economically doomed. However,
there's a silver lining. Though.
There's a silver lining.
Buy gold and Bitcoin.
There's an enormous chance for economic rebirth. And this is the area too where, and we'll get into culture after this. This is one of those areas too where I think some of the inevitable changes that are going to have to take place as a result to the sort of fiscal and monetary mismanagement that we've experienced have the possibility, especially when you're looking at the renewed sense of faith, right? Here's what I'm going to say. There's a lot of people out there that have lived atomized lives that are going to be doomed by what is probably going to happen in the not so distant economic future. But can I say this right now? Nobody in like what we call our church life group or that close-knit friend group, no one there is going without food. No one there is going without, companionship and community. None of them. Why? Because it's not determined by these. We've already identified these things as a possibility. And so we've set ourselves up to be in a position to be able to support and help out one another. So I probably went to silver lining too quickly, but
you pulled a Tina right there. But and now I'm gonna pull a Christian and show you a tweet that I put out, because I think you're gonna laugh at it.
Here we go. Go ahead.
Here we go. This is where I'm at when it comes to the economic question. So for the audio listeners, it's a picture of the Lusitania sinking.
Yeah.
And it's a person. But how will we solve the Cunard Line's budget deficit?
Yeah.
The Cunard Line owned Lusitania. That's the current state of the fiscal, ship of state.
Yeah.
We are sinking. And, bless their hearts, I look at people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey in DC that are like, they're fighting over like the one big beautiful budget bill right now. And, they're like, but all the deficit spending and they're still kind of committed to trying to balance the budget. And I'm sitting here like, where's the lifeboats?
Yeah.
It's time to start boarding the lifeboats. And here's the reason why. Because since 2020, the federal debt has gone up. Let's see here. It was 23 trillion in quarter one of 2020.
Yeah.
And what is it now? Oh, it's 36.
It passed 37. It's just not on that chart.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is actually a little bit dated. So, so that's what, 14 trillion in 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, I remember in 2012, around the time of the Democratic National Convention, there were a lot of Republicans that were making memes talking about that the national debt had crossed 16 trillion.
Yeah.
And like it was, this is a huge issue. Romney's going to run on it in the general election. He lost, obviously, because voters don't actually care about balancing the budget, right? He talked about cutting PBS funding, and Mitt Romney ran a bunch of ads about how he wants to slash Big Bird.
Yeah.
Right?
That's how Obama attacked him.
And then he won in a landslide. So I mean, that's kind of the problem, right? Is that, as Nick Land said, a thrifty politician is an incompetent politician, and the Democratic variant of Darwinism will remove such misfits from the gene pool. Like, he's right on that.
A lot of people don't concern themselves with what's happening on that level because it's not affecting them, or at least they don't feel it affecting them. Not yet.
Or they don't make a direct connection to the effects they're feeling and the policies that got them there.
Sure, maybe so. People do things that make them feel good at the time. It's the reason people smoke. It's the reason people do drugs. It's the reason people have, whatever, like casual sex. So I'm just saying that at some point, the chickens come home to roost. Almost nobody lives their life kind of trying to prepare for what could come at the consequences that could come of their actions right now.
Yeah.
A lot of people do live for today, and unfortunately, they don't plan for the future.
A lot?
Especially politicians.
Almost all people do that.
Yeah.
But those who plan ahead, getting to your point, jumping ahead, we're all jumping ahead now, getting to your point, like those who do plan ahead will be able to get through this. But I want to just go through these points briefly before we get to that. So the national debt situation is really bad, right? Again, it's gone up 14 trillion in 5 years. Interest rates are rising. They were on a 50-year downward decline, right? 50-year downward trend reversed itself after 2020. This is the
kind of had to. You can't print that much money.
If you scroll up to here, this is the 30-year mortgage rate.
Yeah.
And you see, look at what Paul Volcker did in the 1980s. Yeah. But so it peaked in 82, and it was, not 50, but 40 years of constant decline. And now I'm going to scroll up just a little bit so that way people can see this all the way until they basically bottomed out here in 2020 at almost zero, right?
Yeah.
If you got it, I really should have gotten a house in 2020, but now I'm looking for one right now, and look at where I am, right? They're now in the mid to high sixes. And so I think we kind of bounced off of, literally the floor right there. And now we're heading higher. And so interest rates are going higher, and they're probably going to keep going higher. Mm-hmm. If it took us 40 years to go from 18 to effectively zero, we might be entering a 40-year period of structurally higher rates. Think about what that's going to do to people's debt position. And on that front, here's the federal surplus or deficit. We've been running a deficit since really the dot-com bubble burst, as a percentage of GDP over time. And this goes all the way back to the 30s.
Yeah.
So you have this, look at what happened here. That's called World War II.
Yeah.
And then look, we balanced it briefly, and then we started running some deficits, and then oh, look, we're hovering around zero until, what do you think happened here?
Yeah, that's where they decoupled from gold.
We started dropping, and then they started rising in the 90s because people were worried. You got the bond vigilantes that came out during the Clinton administration because we had been dropping so much.
Yeah.
So what do Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich do? Well, they balance the budget, and we get the dot-com surplus in 2000 that immediately disappears after 9/11. And look at the trend since then. Just consistent.
Yeah.
I mean, the bow is, if we're using ship analogies again, the bow is now permanently underneath the waves, and we are taking on water. And we're in a peacetime, non-recession environment. I don't care what people say about Gaza or Ukraine. Like, we are not we are not here.
Yeah.
We do not have troops in Iwo Jima right now.
Yeah.
Well, actually, okay. Actually, we we do have troops in Okinawa. But
The bottom line is we're not fighting
troops fighting active wars.
We're not fighting a multi-front war.
And we're not in the middle of a depression, right? And so non-recession, non-wartime period, and look at the budget deficit that we've got. It's 6%.
Yeah.
And notice how it's just been constantly dropping since 2000. So we've got that. We have
higher
higher
we just
interest.
raised and again, regardless of what you think about the big beautiful bill, we just raised the debt ceiling again. So there's no,
and we have structurally higher interest rates.
Yep.
And the deficit has blown out since. I mean, it's been blowing out my whole life, but it's blown out since 2020. And I mean, between just those three things, the fiscal picture is just utterly disastrous. And I think that some people are now. They've gone in two directions. Some people have realized, like Elon, for example, have realized like, oh, this is really bad, and I really want to do something about it.
And he's become very singularly focused on
and I think he's kind of missed, like, this is something we should have been dealing with 10, 20 years ago.
The other problem,
and then other people are just blackpilled, and they're like, we're doomed. Who cares? Just let the ship sink, and I want my gold, Bitcoin. Buy gold, Bitcoin, and lead.
Yeah.
and land, right? Like
Yeah.
those are your four things you need to just ride out the
Yeah,
storm.
gold, Bitcoin, lead, and land. It's well. So look, here's what does all of this mean? The seeming unwillingness of politicians to take seriously the problem with our monetary policy and our spending policy is a reflection of what the voters want. This is the part where I'm going to look smack dab at the voters and I'll be like, you are getting exactly what you voted for. Not everyone, obviously. I'm not getting what I voted for, right? But the vast majority of people, to include Republicans, are getting what they voted for because I hate government spending except for my Social Security. I hate government spending except for my Medicaid and Medicare. I hate government spending except for my farm subsidy. I hate government spending except for my electric vehicle subsidy. I hate government spending except for my housing subsidy. You can't do that. You can't do that. The whole reason why there's this wonderful Davy Crockett story where he's explaining how he went home and basically got like just raked over the coals by somebody that was furious at him for allocating money for a fire that broke out in Washington, D.C. in the early 1800s. And it's this whole talk about how it wasn't yours to give. You treated the government like a charitable institution. It's not. The government is supposed to raise funds just for its essential purposes and services, which are unique to it, and charity isn't one of them. Well, we threw that out a long time ago. We threw that out at the beginning of the progressive era, and then when the New Deal hit, that we majorly threw it out, and then when the Great Society hit, we completely buried any notion that the government wasn't there to take care of you from cradle to grave. And here we are, right? Here we are. But most voters do not make the connection between, yes, your Social Security is burying the country. Yes, your Medicaid and Medicare is burying the country. Well, what if we got better people that manage it? It would still bury the country. Why? Because you have a retirement fund managed by politicians that operates like a Ponzi scheme. Okay? I'm not the bad guy for pointing that out. That's just the reality of what was established. But I paid into it. Yes, you are absolutely right. You were required by the government to pay in to a horrible retirement fund, arguably one of the worst retirement funds ever conceived by the mind of man, and which will eventually not be sustainable. Well, but I want my money. Yeah, and that's exactly what FDR was counting on. That's exactly what the left-wing politicians who incorporated this were counting on, is that because you were compelled to contribute, you would demand your contribution. Because that makes sense. The problem is that it was managed by idiots. And we can't make it better. Well, we can fix it. No, you can't.
Well, a lot of these very same people voted for the politicians who looted it as well.
Well, and now what happened the first time you did it? Well, if we can do it for retirement, we should do it for healthcare. Well, if we can do it for healthcare, we should do it for education. Well, if we can do it for education, we should do it and the next thing you know, right, you are in a fiscally unsustainable position and you don't even like the results. You don't even like the results. And here's the other part that blows my mind. People think that, well, if that money goes away, everyone will just starve. Because that's what was happening before we had all these massive programs? No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. By the way, if you wanted to do something, Singapore has a system. They have mandatory retirement, and you have to contribute to those. The difference is the government doesn't manage the funds. It's private sector, right? Maybe with limited government assurances, but private sector, you contribute into that. But now you have a legal right to the money that you've actually contributed into something. Oh, but it's risky because it's the private sector. What do you think is more risky? Giving your money over to a private index fund, which usually includes hundreds of businesses all operating under the one very, very specific goal, which is to make a profit, or handing it over to politicians who are spending other people's money on nothing grander than getting themselves reelected? Which of those propositions do you think is more risky in the long term? Again, I'm not the bad guy for pointing it out. This is what happened. This is what your politicians did. Why? Because you voted for the politicians that were promising you nice sounding things. And you thought to yourself, well, it's the government. Of course, they'll have to make good on the promises, right? So The question is, are there enough people in the electorate that would vote for the people that would actually cut these programs, or better yet, completely eliminate them from existence so something else could actually emerge to address the concerns that people have about healthcare, about retirement, about education? And the answer that we've gotten ever since these programs have been put in place is no. No. So I would
like
just
a
say,
resounding no.
so in order, so not to be rude here, but this is something where I've just dealt with this long enough to where, to Christian's point, I've got to the point where it's like, okay, you are going to be you're going to be very angry about, you're angry with me right now for how dare I question these institutions which are just there to help retired people and just there to provide a social safety net and just there to provide basic access to healthcare and education. So people, you're mad at me now for questioning these, but in 20, 30, 40 years, okay, you are going to be mad at somebody else. I promise you. You're going to be very mad at them. Right, Christian, what's your statement? Nobody ever lost an election for spending too much?
But they have lost their heads.
But they have lost their heads because there's a certain point where it just disintegrates. And the same voter that's being educated in a government-run school, that's being taught to believe they don't have to worry about any of these things and that these are sacred institutions that are there for their benefit, then become adults that either live off of these welfare systems or get a job, but never seem to associate the bad policy with the bad results. So they keep voting for the politicians that promise them things. That this is how you get guys like Mamdani.
And they just assume that the next generation will carry them on their backs. The problem is they're killing the next generation, or they're not having the next generation. And there's a lot less of the next generation to do that heavy lifting. When you're talking about a 1.6 birth rate right now, back when Social Security was set up, it was something like 6 babies to every. I
know it wasn't 6, but it was definitely
the average family size was like 5 or 6 babies.
There were far more workers than there were retirees, and now that ratio is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and so you are pulling more resources away from 30-something, 40-something, or 20-something.
So instead of having 5 or 6 people to carry you on their back, now you have 1.6 people to carry you on their back.
We're getting close to like 2. And the other thing that's really frustrating to people is the 2 that are carrying. The way this works is the 2 that are carrying can't afford to buy a house right now, so they can pay into Social Security for somebody that's got 2 houses.
I was going to say that this is where it gets really nefarious.
This is also the part where young people finally look at grandpa and grandma and be like, you know what? I don't own a home, much less a primary home and a vacation home. And guess what? I don't have a golf club membership. And now, again, this is obviously not a description of everybody who's elderly. But if you look at who has the majority of the wealth, and it makes sense that it would be this case, right? It would make sense that older people would have more wealth than younger people.
But it's skewed far more than it normally would under normal market conditions.
Exactly. It's skewed to a point. And again, it's not the market. It's not capitalism, right? It's direct government intervention in order to achieve these sort of end states.
It's the Cantillon effect.
Yeah.
I was going to say, this is actually the consequence of this. So money's being created in the form of money printing from the Federal Reserve, in the form of credit issuance from the federal government, and also in the form of credit creation within the private sector. That's remember in the podcast where I said the Fed can't print fast enough.
Yeah.
Is the irony. Like every dollar that the Fed is printing is creating additional credit that operates like money until there's actually a claim on it. And this goes right back to the Austrians who point out that you get credit bubbles, right? And then eventually people realize that there's not enough resources for all the claims, and then you get the collapse of the credit bubble. Well, one of the consequences of the endless creation of credit in the form of new issuance of loans or just direct money printing is that money does not get evenly distributed in society. It's not like everybody's getting a check. Now, we briefly did that in COVID, right? But even then, the government gave everybody $1,200 checks, but they were also printing trillions that they were not handing to the average Joe on the street. They were giving that money to select entities.
Well, and this is why movements like Occupy Wall Street actually had a legitimate grievances. The problem was that they picked the wrong bad guy. The bad guy was not capitalism. The bad guy was government manipulation, intervention.
They were mad
economy.
at who was getting
Yes.
the money, and that's
Yeah.
the cancel-on effect. And so if this doesn't get resolved, you will have eventually a second Occupy Wall Street, except you will get Marie Antoinette scenes
Yeah.
in Wall Street.
Well, here's what we need to recognize. So over the last 5 years, the reason why this has been so exacerbated is largely because of COVID, and because there are certain fiscal realities and monetary realities that happen as a result of COVID that could no longer be ignored. It could no longer be gradually. Again, they turned up the heat so much that now everyone's feeling it, and it's a question of whether or not they associate it with what actually happened. But here's what I will tell you: the good news in all of it. The bad news is that there's certain economic consequences right now that I feel are probably inevitable. The idea that you're actually going to correct them or grow out of them or anything else politicians are promising you is probably not entirely true. There are certain things that can be done that will lessen the blow, but the blow is coming. The correction is coming. So what does that mean? Well, the good news is that what it actually means is those people that are identifying this now and are looking at, okay, what am I going to spend time investing my time and money in order to develop capabilities or assets or whatever it is. Well, again, I do not claim to be a financial advisor. I don't give financial advice, but I will say this. I think the people that own like physical gold, I think the people that own things like physical silver, I think the people that own things like even things like Bitcoin or some sort of reliable cryptocurrency, the people that are part of like really strong families and strong knit communities, the people that actually like own a sufficient amount of land to be able to, raise a certain amount of their own food. These are people that are developing skill sets and developing assets that do very, very well in surviving the sort of massive economic downturn that you would potentially see. Now, the people that try to do it in complete isolation, a lot of times they're the ones that first get looted. Okay, you made really, really good economic decisions, but you own a mansion in downtown New York City. I got bad news. You're going to be the subject of one of those Marie Antoinette moments. All right, but the people that are like, nope, I live out in more of a tight-knit community where we're interconnected. We know one another. We come to one another's aid when it's needed. We have similar, moral foundations, religious foundations, and we have capabilities which have unique benefits. They're beneficial throughout all of time, but they become especially beneficial in times of great economic downturn. Those are the people that weather the storm a lot better. And in the meantime, they also were able to figure out what was actually really important to them and its family and community. And so I think that the people that are recognizing this now and making the proper decisions and building those sorts of relationships and communities, they're going to be the people in the best position to weather that storm and to really come out on top and to potentially be in a position where, because this is the other thing that happens, right? When you have a massive economic downturn, that is horrible. We all wish that wouldn't happen. But it also usually presents opportunities for the people that saw it coming and prepared appropriately. And now all of a sudden you're in a position where, one, you can help people in need, right? You can help people in need, but you can also, because you were the one that actually has resources and assets now, you're also able to expand those resources and assets. And again, you can choose to do that for good, right? You can choose to do that for any number of things that are positive for you, your family, your community, and potentially for others. Because it's not a bad thing for the people that have resources in the midst of an economic downturn to be able to then utilize those resources to provide not just charity, but to provide opportunity for people that are going to be desperately looking for it. So there is a silver lining to all of this, but that leads back into...
Yeah, you were bringing up community.
That leads to the fifth one, and that's culture. What has happened culturally over the last 5 years? Well, what we saw is, I think, a complete... The control of the culturally shaping institutions in this country became painfully obvious during 2020 and 2021. Painfully obvious on who was actually running things. And a lot of the institutions that the majority of Americans still had some sort of faith in, many of those people were very disappointed. And what they found out is their news media, higher education, their public school system, their government, the
scientific
industry,
community,
the scientific community, all of the various culturally shaping institutions, which they thought had some sort of basic commitment to a shared fundamental worldview, a shared view with respect to morality, or so, even if they knew there was differences, there's still this underlying current that they thought was still preeminent within these culturally shaping institutions, right? Because this is, of course, what we believe as Americans or as reasonable human beings. And what they found out was, nope, not even close. Not even close. The same people that will tell you that they're all about tolerance will shut down your church and throw you in jail and vote in a plurality to take away your kids if you don't get vaccines. And you're not allowed to ask questions because you're not a government-approved expert. I got to tell you, liberals running around going, trust the experts. If you wanted to know anything that did more to damage the term expertise, it was that. And look, it's not that expertise in and of itself is a bad thing. It's a question of who gets to bestow expertise onto someone and to what degree are we required to obey them. And the left's answer was, we're the ones that get to decide who's the experts, and your obedience to them must be absolute. And the response back was, oh, we'll see about that.
And there was the element of don't believe your own eyes and ears,
Yes.
because we were told a whole slew of things right at the beginning of COVID that they completely flip-flopped on and told us was not the case the rest of the time.
Yeah.
You know, I remember Fauci getting on the TV saying that you're more likely to expose yourself to extra germs and virus and everything by using a mask than you are the other way around, and these masks aren't going to help you. To later on, him basically telling people they should double mask and watching him double mask.
Yeah.
It's just... It's wild to me that we saw with our own eyes this happen, yet we were told, oh, trust the experts. Well, the experts said this 5 minutes ago, and now they're saying this. Yeah, so trust them.
Show me your degree, source, like that sort of arrogant dismissal of obvious reality, that ability of the left to completely dismiss anything in the boundaries of just, interestingly enough, lived experience was, well, no, if you don't have a degree in epidemiology, you're not allowed to notice that this crap isn't working.
Well, and they threw out the testimony of all these other people who did have degrees in epidemiology and basically cast them out of the scientific community.
Yeah.
And we also, during this time, saw a rise in junk science. I mean, they were literally trying to tell you, and there in some communities are still saying this, that oh, well, you can be just kind of a woman, like you could have female body parts, but then the surge of testosterone makes you a boy halfway through, but your parts have already become a girl. And they're like all of this mind pretzeling nonsense and junk science that they're trying to push on people. And well, some people are intersex, and this is just a lower version of being intersex. And I'm just to the point where I'm going, I don't believe you anymore. You can't even tell me when life begins. Yeah. I mean, and now you don't even know what a woman is or what a man is, and now you're trying to separate, and split hairs on these things. And, you try to tell me that this freaking virus came from a bat when you knew dang well what they were doing at Wuhan. Yeah. Give me a break.
It got to what 2020 did was it revealed the ideological capture of the culturally shaping institutions within our country. And conservatives and libertarians to some degree realized, oh, we're the targets of this.
Yes, and I think that COVID was that one thread of the sweater that was pulled, and now the whole thing has come unraveled, and we suddenly realize that we're really just naked. Everything has just crumbled on their end. They no longer have full capture of the media. There's a lot more people than ever are starting to homeschool. Yeah. We have on the entertainment side, the right was constantly playing catch up in every arena. Now on YouTube's not censoring us as much as they used to. Like we used to get constantly censored. And now that's going away. We're starting to have different ways of entertaining. All of our podcasts are doing better than theirs now. Yeah. Because we're not getting censored.
We're beating the Democratic Party. Did you know that they have a podcast? Nobody watches it.
Oh, of course not. Well, but the issue to that point, what happened is that all the way up until 2020, if you were like very politically active or very religious, you definitely felt the undercurrent of the culturally shaping institutions are against me. But then when you talk to your neighbor who wasn't politically active or whatnot, they just thought you were kind of being hyperbolic and you were kind of overblowing the situation. It's not that big a deal. Again, my buddy Jim, who's a Democrat, loves, watching the same team, I do. 2020 broke all that. 2020 broke all that in a big way where, again, people saw what it was, and it is having a lasting impact on American culture, because we're now at this state where we realize that, again, our culture is heavily divided. And I'm not going to be, and again, whenever you point out the differences and people, well, you're just being divisive. No. I'm pointing out the truth, and the truth happens to be incredibly divisive right now within our culture. And that tells us something about our culture. Our culture is divided, right? There's no nice way for me to put it that's going to make it not divided. It's just divided. The difference is one side of this equation always knew it was divided. One side of this equation, the left, recognized the divide and did everything they possibly could to put them in a position to be able to leverage power and culturally shaping institutions to get what they wanted. And then after 2020, that's when the right realized that, oh, this is a cultural divide so great that it's no longer a question of just this kind of like glossed over reconciliation. One side is going to have to win. One side is going to have to win, because I'm telling you right now, this world where you get to trans my kids, this world where you confiscate my firearms, this world where you tax me to death, this world where, according to the Democrat candidate for mayor of New York City, they can seize the means of production. I'm not living in it. And so the cultural divide is real. Both sides are now fighting it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
But we're the ones breeding.
And both sides recognize that you have to win it. Right? We don't, this whole this is the part where the left, the people, the new converts to the right think, I just want to go back to 2005. Nope. That's not an option. I'm sorry, it isn't. That is not an option.
And there's so many enlightened centrists.
Yes.
That are like that. We need to get back to, common discourse and respecting each other. It's what you said. One side is going to win this fight.
Yes.
And it was not until post 2020. Like, I had somebody, I sent a reply to Elon. He had this tweet where he was talking about budget deficits and the bill in Congress and everything. And I was like, what's the point of balancing the budget if we're going to hand the country over to people who hate us?
Yeah.
And somebody in the replies was like, former Nick Freitas staffer Christian Hines would have called this racist in 2017. And I kind of want to reply to this person. I haven't yet. And I want to be like, actually, I probably would have called it racist until 2020. Because I'm a recovering libertarian.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, have gone through what I went through, where they were, again, normal conservatives, classical liberals, libertarians, whatever you want to call it, where it was, you live and let live, leave me alone. That doesn't work. They will never leave you alone. And the one thing that I don't think the right has fully gotten around to, because I think that there's an element of the right that has woken up and realized this is a power struggle. I don't think that the right has yet fully realized that, yeah, one side might win, but that requires power to win. Yes. There's this quote from Javier Milei. He gave an interview a few months ago, and he said he was replying to criticisms of other libertarians to him. And he's like, look, a lot of these people, don't seem to realize that power is a zero-sum game, and either we have it or the left has it.
Yeah.
And I think that the right still is afraid of power, and the left is addicted to power, and we wonder why things are the way that they are.
Yeah.
The right has to get around to wielding power. It has to get over its aversion to power is evil. No, it is not evil. Power in the hands of good people is not evil. Mm-hmm. Evil men having power is evil. But we want good men to have power. Again, that does not mean absolute power, Kim Jong-un. People have this idea, and it goes back to the previous debates that you and I have had on this before. When we debated neo-reactionaryism versus classical liberalism, like a year ago?
Yeah.
You brought up the question of to what degree did the power that the French king have was constrained by technology? Mm-hmm. And I brought up, well, look at the amount of power that the French government had under Louis XVI in, say, 1788, mm-hmm. and look at the power that the French Republic had in 1793. Mm-hmm. Who was chopping everybody's heads off, murdering hundreds of thousands of their own countrymen, and establishing a dictatorship entirely centered in Paris and eradicating local government? It was not Louis XVI that was doing that. And yet, what great technological leap took place between 1788 and 1793? Almost nothing. Maybe you could point to one or two things. Maybe they came up with a more efficient wheel for wagons, right? Yeah. But the point is that it was a mindset change is what happened. The mindset change of Louis XVI was, yeah, he was the monarch, the sovereign of France, but there were ancient rights and privileges and customs that went back to, Charlemagne that he did not touch.
Yeah.
And yet, look at what happened when the French revolutionaries came in power. Now, does that mean that in the American case that we need to bring back a Louis the 16th? Well, maybe not Louis XVI because he wasn't a great king, but regardless of your position on that question, right? Because I might have a different answer.
He always
than
has
other
to bring it back to like why he's a monarchist
Regardless
now.
of your answer to that question, I think that what everybody on the right needs to realize is that if we're so obsessed with simply how do we eliminate power rather than who's in power, eventually you are just going to get evil people in power. And we need to be I am far more concerned about the character of men that have power than I am about the amount of power that they have. Because at the end of the day, if somebody like Cincinnatus or Washington had absolute theoretical unlimited power in the sense that the king alone writes the laws, I wouldn't be that concerned if George Washington or Cincinnatus had it. I'd be very concerned if the Democratic mayoral candidate in New York City had that type of authority.
Well, I think, look, here's what I think it comes down to. Your point about the ring of power cannot be destroyed, right? Is I think a sound one. It's a question of what is the worldview? What is the worldview that's going to predominate within society? Because power will be wielded, and like you said, the character and the objectives of the people who wield it matter. I do not think that means that the structure doesn't matter, right? I'm not handing stuff over to an individual sovereign to rule over. I'm just not. Like I've got that. It's called God. It's called Christ. There is no human counterpart that I'm going to give that to. So I do believe that there's something to be said for creating structures and a culture around those structures, which recognizes the necessity of wielding power within certain boundaries, right? But those boundaries should exist. What I believe is happening right now, though, is that because the left has always accepted that there's going to be power and that it should be centralized and it should be centralized in their hands, they've got a big jump on what it looks like to actually go after it. The right, because of our classical liberal tradition, which is focused on the idea of restraining power, to your point, we're very, very cautious about using it. And that's going to have to change, not in the sense that now, okay, good, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and the only way we're going to beat the left is if we use their tactics and strategies against them. You got to fight fire with fire. Whoa, how do you mean? Because there's a lot of things the left is doing right now that I'm not willing to do, because I think there's something corrosive in that action which will rob you of any sort of genuine moral authority to do what you're doing. It will eventually consume and destroy you. That's the message of this concept of absolute power and wielding power to an end state without any concern about the repercussions of it or the temptations associated with it. So the question is what is the framework in which we're willing to use power? And that's an important question that the right is asking right now. They haven't figured it out yet.
But we started asking it.
Wait a second, I'm not done yet. You're right, we have started asking it, but I'm even watching this, like, it's a little bit concerning to see how the right is addressing some of these issues. Because there is a tendency now to use everything as a litmus test for loyalty. And there's also various perverse incentives with respect to controlling that power, especially the ways it manifests within the media, within the social media world that we see going on right now, where I'm seeing some pretty unreasonable views where I'm looking at it going, what the hell is going on? To where one of the biggest things that I've been hammering on over and over and over again is there's two things that I'm looking for on this cultural fight within the right that I think is absolutely critical going forward. One is I'm looking for who's in the arena, not who's in the stands. If you are complaining from the stands, good, stay there. Because I'm tired of people that contribute nothing other than their opinion. They put in no work, they put in no effort, and yet they somehow think that they're the ones we're all supposed to stop the world for and listen to every time they complain on X. I'm tired of it. Like, don't tell me you're going to fight. Show me where your scars are, because this fight's been going on for a while. And if you're just now getting involved, thanks. but you don't get to run the ship. The other thing that I'm looking for is we are going to have disagreements at times. When I see someone that has consistently been in the arena, which has fought and who has lost fights at personal cost to stand up and do the right thing, you are not my enemy. I may disagree with you from time to time, right? There's times where I really appreciate Thomas Massey. There's other times where I disagree with him. He's not my enemy, right? There's other people that I see where there's times where I disagree with them. There's times, but they have Mike Lee. This is another perfect example. I'm watching people trash Mike Lee. Oh, he wants to sell off all these public lands. You mean government-owned lands? And you know what? There may be some genuine issues with the way that Mike Lee structured that bill. That's fine. Let's have those debates. But if you're telling me right now Mike Lee is just some sort of awful, evil sellout, I'm looking at you going, I know who Mike Lee is. Who the hell are you? You had no interest for this fight 45 minutes ago until it impacted you in a personal way. I've seen Mike Lee sacrifice time and effort to fight for the things that we believe in. So maybe I disagree with him on this particular approach. But no, you don't get to tell me Mike Lee gets thrown over as a bad guy on this. Maybe we disagree, fine. But that's the part that I'm seeing right now that will destroy the cultural, what I hope will be a cultural revival on the right, is distinguishing between the people that have proven over time and through conflict that they can be relied upon. Not perfect, not trusted no matter what, but relied upon. If someone's proven that, they don't get thrown over by somebody that showed up yesterday that just happens to be regurgitating what you like to hear right now. Because the person that has figured out that there's a certain thing that they can yell or scream that will get clicks, that person has not been tested by fire. That person has just figured out the algorithm. I want people that have been tested by fire. Not because I'm going to trust them in any situation no matter what, but because they've proven to me that they're willing to stand by principle when it hurt them. And quite frankly, the deficit that we've had in political leadership, in philosophical leadership, in theological leadership in this country has not come from the people that have been willing to stand by principle under difficult circumstances. It's been the people that have been willing to abandon it for temporary political expediency. And nobody gets to sit on the sidelines and trash the guys that have fought that hard and throw them overboard the moment you disagree. Not with me anyways. You can do whatever you want, but you don't get to do it with me because this fight right now is so critical. Now, here's what I'll say. There are times when people engage in what I would call philosophical intransigence, which is to say they've picked their one or two issues and the moment you cross them on anything, even if it's subtle, even if it's nuanced, even if it's just a question of strategy, not the underlying principle, those people will engage in a degree of intransigence that makes them ineffective. I can't do anything with you, man. I can't do anything with you because you insist that there's only one way to fight. And if there's one thing I've learned in this entire process is no, there's multiple ways. There are certain lines that we should not cross. There are certain ideas that I will not give up on. I will not give up on being pro-life, ever, ever. But I will fight in the way that I think is best for it at any given time. And so that's what I hope we're willing to do, is let's differentiate between the people that have been fair weather fans, fair weather fighters, and the people that have been consistent over time. And when the fair weather people betray us, we should probably start recognizing that maybe that's because they were never really on our side in the first place. When the people that we disagree with, who have proven over time that they're willing to be, maybe at the very least, we should hear them out. If we decide that we disagree on this particular topic, maybe we don't agree on that particular topic and we keep fighting. But I'm watching a lot of people that they're going to find out the hard way that they're all alone in this fight because they either were intransigent to a point where you couldn't work with them on anything, or they were so willing to stab everybody in the back the moment they didn't do what they wanted. And we've seen a lot of that recently over budget discussions and over Iran and Israel. And so the right is going to have to make a decision. Now, here's what I'm going to hope for. I'm going to hope that we can actually make a coherent worldview on the right that we're willing to actually stand up for and fight for. that we don't throw over everybody over minor disagreements, but we do hold people to a certain commitment to that which is true, that which is honorable, and that which we're willing to do. Because here's what it comes down to. You got to be able to wield the power, because we got to win this fight. And if we don't, I got news for you. You're going to be far less concerned over any individual vote. You're going to be far less concerned over any individual political battle that we're having on social media today than we will be with what happens to our country if the left wins this argument, if the left wins this fight. So that's what I would ask the right to remember. But the good news is this. The good news is this. The resurgence has already started. Right? The fact that the most encouraging things to me about everything we've discussed, it's not the economics, it's not the politics, right? It's the faith, the family, and the cultural battles that are taking place. Because when I start to see a generation of young men step up and say, the first place I'm going to go seek answers is with God, that's where I see people actually oriented to something and to a civilization which you can actually build from. Doesn't mean they're automatically guaranteed to get it right. That's the part where mentorship comes into place. That's the part where people have been down this trail a little bit longer down the path. That's where they got to come in and help, educate, and mentor, and guide, and fight alongside. But the fact that we're seeing it happen in those areas, faith, family, and culture, that's the one that gives me hope for the political and the economic long term. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. And just a reminder that today's episode was brought to you by Ground News. If you go to ground.news/MTA, you can get 40% off that Vantage plan subscription. I'm telling you right now, you're going to love searching this site. It is nice to have somebody that curates all the news in one place, makes it easy for you to find. And hey, 40% off ain't a bad deal. So ground.news/MTA. Thanks again for them to sponsoring this episode. Thank you again for being here. By the way, if you want to be a part of the pregame and postgame of each one of our episodes, check out the link in the description. Join our community. We'd love to see you there. Once again, signing off now. We'll see you next episode.